I had a previous life before getting into this job, you know. I was a university lecturer. I was mainly focusing on the sociology of the family. I was in my early 30s, and that was time to move to a new step in life, the adventure, you know, the need to do something absolutely stimulating after being injured in a bombing. I think I don't want to be called an expert, because an expert doesn't encompass a critical dimension in our work, and it is the commitment. In child protection, if you have no commitment, do something else, you know. This work requires not applying the guiding principles, the guidelines, out-of-the-shelf solution, but really every time to develop the capacity to look at the situation and identify almost new solutions every time, you know, even if in our work we are so amazed to see how we are always going back to square one, you know. I start as an emergency NGO worker. You know, I was this university lecturer. I start doing other things in France because I have also a lawyer background. And then I volunteered to go in the response famine in Ethiopia and Sudan. So I went in Sudan in '85. I had taken a 6 months sabbatic, and I never went back. I have been on the road for almost 30 years after that, you know. What I have learned, you know, when I work in an organization like Médecins Sans Frontières, I was amazed to see how they were the best in some areas, you know, being the cholera response and so on. But I was working in a country, in Malawi, where there was a very solid health system, and we were not picking people from the system to be involved in the response. I think it was for me one of the first string I pulled, and in UNICEF, you know, because they were lacking the job I was doing. I was doing site planning, you know, negotiating with traditional leaders to get a piece of land for the refugees. I was doing the sanitation and all the logistic and construction, building emergency shelters when we had a cholera epidemic. I was amazed of everything we could do, building from the skills of the local people. In one of the camps I was overseeing, I could feel that there was an hidden issue. And it appeared that, in fact, in the camps, there was a group of 8,000 people who were Jehovah's Witnesses. It was illegal to be a Jehovah's Witness in Malawi, so they were hiding, and I managed, working with the people, to meet the Council of Elders in that community. And the day we had a cholera epidemic, I had 8,000 people building small hospital, building the road, and really convincing the people in the camp not to run away when there was a cholera epidemic. Then I went with Oxfam in Mozambique. Again, I was amazed to see how politics sometimes is a smokescreen of what we are doing. Because at that time it was a fight against apartheid. The government of Mozambique was supposed to belong to the good guys. They are not so good as they pretended. I could see the very high level of corruption, how we as the NGOs, we were manipulated to punish some people and grant others. I saw a forced displacement of people and forced starvation of people by government. So I wrote a report to my organization. I shared it with the British Embassy. Very quickly, the government could identify who had written the report, and I got expelled from the province. But there was a UN special representative. He grabbed me and he said, you know, I think we need people like you working with us. This is when I started doing another kind of work. First of all, I was asked to oversee a kind of analytical oversee of food distribution, really thinking what is the game behind the logistic distribution of maize and sorghum. One day he called me to the capital city, and he asked me if I would be interested to try to establish some connection with the armed group in the country. I was young and stupid enough to say yes. I had no driver, I had no radio, and I started this incredible work, going to a bar, trying to find the people, because I had been expelled from Zambezia, where I knew everybody, I knew so well the story, and I had done my thesis on the relationship of the peasants and the armed groups. Manica province, where I was working, it was more complex. One day there is a guy telling me, why don't you come back tomorrow and I may introduce you to people. I meet the people, take me to meet other people in a village, and then we talk, and then they say, come back in 2 days' time. 2 days after I come back, and they say, this guy will take you to the military base. So you go and walk for 4 hours. Of course, you have to be very careful. There are landmines, there are things like that. And then I was going to the NGOs, to the different agencies, convincing them to come and work with the affected people in the Renamo zone. There had been 3 years of drought in the country. I went in some areas where everybody was wearing clothes made out of tree bark. And so I went working or remembering people that as NGOs, they had a human rights mandate. And I was very surprised to see the different reactions. I managed to convince Concern, Médecins Sans Frontières, World Vision, UNICEF, and step by step I was bringing the organization to do the assessment with the population with me. In the middle of the bush somewhere, there were 15,000 people waiting for us at a place where when I had parked my car the first time there was nothing to see. Then after I joined UNICEF, I was an emergency officer there, discussed with the representative, and I explained to him, there was a need to ensure that we were not only supporting population in government areas, but as well to work with the population under the control of the Renamo. I start negotiating with them the release of child soldiers. It took 18 months. This is where I start learning dimensions I did not know. The leader of the Renamo was invited to Washington because Renamo was considered as a freedom fighters organization at that time. I met the US ambassador and I explained to him what I'm doing, that I have used with the Renamo the forms for unaccompanied and separated children. I met with the children, we filled the family reunification form and we took the picture. I had met around 1,000 child soldiers with the Renamo, and one day there is a number 2 of the Renamo at the reception desk of UNICEF. He comes complaining that we had not done enough to put into place the program of demobilization of child soldiers, and I had to explain to him that I was waiting for the agreement with his own organization. We had a window, he said, come and pick the children. We did it. We could not rely on the local NGOs regarding the accommodation for these children. So we settled self-managed centers by the children themselves. With the 1,000 forms, we had already identified more than 300 families. And so every day we were coming to the center, picking some of the children and keeping the children busy, re-electing every time, everyone responsible for this and that. Everything I have been doing in child protection, we had to invent it almost. It became the best way to break the military structure among the children. This is where I learned the most critical element of our work, which was the family connection. But the very first group of children we took back to a community, we were just amazed. So the sudden level of mobilization of the community, the way they welcome the children. This is where I learned to build alliance with traditional healers. Then after, you have negotiated with an armed group, so why don't you go here and there and there and there? And I have done it with most probably 20 armed groups around the world. You have to identify a win-win moment. I go to the armed group because they want to get some political connection, or there is a time for negotiation with the government. I have even done it with the Taliban. What I have learned is how emergency response are always identifying institutional responses rather than community-based responses. And how every time you have to go back to the drawing board and reinstate core guiding principles. All children everywhere. Every emergency, you have camps, created, institutions created. 2015, 2017, I work in the coordination on the response on migration in Europe. And I was amazed to see in the camps in Turkey, institutions being built in the center of the camp to accommodate children. In communities, the Syrian communities, incredibly well organized. It was very clear that you could identify solutions which were not institutional. And I have seen the very same issues in Greece, in Italy, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and now I see the very same problem in France and Germany. I start working on a new dimension of our work, which I have found absolutely fascinating. I have been working on child protection system in the ex-Soviet bloc, and where you have to rebuild the system. We are mainly based on institutions with the aim of punishing parents. And so you need to bring a complete different dynamic. Getting really to an engagement with medical staff was the most challenging issue. People were parents were disempowered by a system where everybody was telling them the best solution is this one. We have been working 20 years now in this, and we have not changed a thing regarding the way parents are welcome. Then, of course, when you work on child protection system, you start looking pretty much at violence against children. What I have learned from that and what I have been trying to really change the way people are working on the issue is stop talking about a decrease of violence. Stop talking about putting an end to violence. This doesn't exist. The only thing I have learned over the last 20 years is how little we know about the issues. We always look at a picture which is a picture of yesterday. What is happening really today in terms of abuse of children? It's just there in front of us and we never see it. Start talking about an increase of identifying the cases, an increase in developing a response, an increase in a multi-sectorial response. Because what has been fascinating is how, if a child is identified as a victim of violence in the education system, the response will come from the education system. When children who have been victims of violence need a very complex layer of responses. I have seen the very same challenge everywhere. Some of the response we have been trying to develop, the response at municipal level has been the best option. And this is where you can bring the mayor of the city, the people in education, the people in health, the judge, the social workers together to start looking at realistic solutions. And this is also where you get half the children out of detention centers. My very last point is, unaccompanied children during the migration crisis in Europe. We had developed excellent guidelines. If we had applied this guideline in this crisis, we were going to stigmatize the children. Placement in child protection center, first of all, we should be the very first one to recognize that this is not the best protection for children. And sexual abuse of children happen in all institutions, including the child protection ones. It should be a core principle for us. Administrative detention of children is unacceptable. And so all the children placed in these child protection centers stayed there for a year, when they could have been in Germany in 3 days if we had not stopped them on the way. Always need to reinvent our practice to ensure that we are fulfilling, very, very common sense principle. Do not harm, the right to live in a family environment, schooling, respect. Very, very basic things still remain at the heart of the work we should be doing. Stop.
Jean-Claude, thank you very much. It was perfect time. I just ran. Thanks very much.